We are starting, and hopefully my voice holds out so that I can at least get finished. That's wonderful. Glad you made it on time. We are in Exodus chapter 20. Next week, we will do a partial of Exodus chapter 21. And then we will do part of Exodus chapter 24 in that same week. So we're going to do sort of parts of two chapters. And whenever we get into it, you'll see sort of why we're doing that. Just after much prayer, I just feel like we need to go over at least some of this stuff to at least explain, because I've had a lot of people who have actually come to me and saying, questions like, the Bible promotes slavery. And I would explain to them why the Bible does not promote slavery, where it talks about slavery, but nowhere is there a promotion of slavery. So I'm going to actually go into that so I can actually explain what the law was for in regards to slavery and what the New Testament says about slavery also, so that we actually understand the fullness of what God did not do in regards to, agreeing with slavery in any way, shape, or form. So Exodus chapter 20, and this is the beginning of the Ten Commandments. And as we go through that, we're going to go sort of talk about each and every commandment that there is and sort of give everybody a chance to sort of ask questions about it, answer questions about it, so that we can get the full understanding of what the commandments are all about. And we're going to start with verse 1 through 2. Then God gave the people all these instructions. I am the Lord your God who rescued you from the land of Egypt, the place of your slavery. Okay, so right now we're immediately talking about slavery, right? Now we understand that Egypt had the Israelites as slaves for many, many, many years, right? Up to 400 years they were there in that land. So throughout that time they were slaves to the Egyptians. But God is talking to the people, and he says, I am the Lord your God who rescued you from that land of Egypt. Why do you think he spoke to them with these words? That this is who I am.
You can trust me.
Okay, absolutely. So they can say, okay, this is the person who, or the God who did all of these things. So I should be able to trust him with everything that he is getting ready to tell me, right? It is as if he's answering the question, why should we obey? Right? Why is it that I should listen to you? And God is sort of answering that before he starts telling them all of these things that he wants them to do. So he tells them that he is the one who saved them from Egypt. They were saved by his power and his miracles alone. And this is the proof that he is or was who he said he was. Okay? It is important also to realize that the authority behind the words of God. If God says it, we should just believe it, right? Whatever God says, we should just believe it. Now, I think that also carries over to the written word of God, right? If it's in the Bible, if it's in the Bible, we should believe it, no matter what it is. We may disagree with it, but we should still believe it, okay? Because God's word is truth. No matter what it says in the Bible, that is truth. So, once again, that's verse 1 through 2. Verse 3 through 11 is the beginning of the Ten Commandments, and we're going to go ahead and read the first section, and then I'll tell you sort of why we're breaking it down in this form here in a few minutes. Verse 3 through 11, you must not have any other gods before me. You must not make for yourself an idol of any kind or of any image of anything in the heavens and the earth or in the sea. You must not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God who will not tolerate your affection for any other gods. I lay the sins of the parents upon their children. The entire family is affected, even children in the third and fourth generations of those who reject me. But I lavish unfailing love on the generations, on 1,000 generations, on those who love me and obey my commands. You must not misuse the name of the Lord your God. The Lord will not let you go unpunished if you misuse his name. Remember to observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. You have 6 days each week for your ordinary work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath day of rest, dedication to the Lord your God. On that day, no one will work. No one in your household may do any work. This includes you, your sons, your daughters, your male and female servants, your livestock, and any foreigners living among you. For the 6 days, the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and everything in them. But on the seventh day, he rested. That is why the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and set it apart as holy. Okay. The first 4 commands that we just read center on what? God. Okay. All of the first 4 center on our relationship with God. These come first because a relationship with God is the foundation. Okay. That's where we get everything else. If we don't have the relationship with God, none of the other stuff really matters. Okay. It's all based off the relationship with God. The relationship is the priority. Only by having the right relationship with God can we have a right relationship with other people. So you got to fix the thing with God before you can fix the thing with people. So these are the vertical us and God laws, okay? And the second set are the horizontal. They are the us and mankind laws. So what does the first commandment show us of the exclusiveness of worshiping God? What does it show us? Okay. First commandment is you must not have any other gods before me. Right? Okay. Nothing is a substitute. Can't be anything that substitutes for God. Now, do people have substitutes for God? What are some of the substitutes that we have for God? Money, okay. Status, possessions, sports, power. I mean, and there's a lot of things that we replace God with in our lives.
Sometimes it's good stuff. I mean, work, we should be working, but people pervert it.
Absolutely.
Family.
Family.
Wonderful, but people will put that relationship above the relationship with the Lord, and they're doing exactly what he says not to do.
Absolutely. So anything that is replacing God as number one, right, in your life, anything that does that is another God. And once again, we sort of look at it as, well, I don't, worship Buddha, or I don't worship, this or that. But once again, like we talked about, there are so many things that anything that replaces God in our lives is our God. God has to be first. These commandments of God are very simple and easy to understand. And I love the fact that he makes them easy to understand. He says, these are the 10. These are the important ones. I want you guys to really grab a hold of these first 10 because these are super important for you to grab a hold of. And they're so important that I'm going to make them real easy for you to understand. You will have no other gods before me. Okay? Now, this command means what it says. And of course, there are no other real gods. We have to understand that also. There are no other gods. There's not Zeus. There's not Apollo. There's not, any of this stuff. Those are just all false gods. They aren't real gods. God is the only God, but there are many things that people proclaim to be gods. And some completely false, and some perhaps supernatural forces of evil that are from Satan. Okay? Satan likes to parade around as a god. And he likes to present himself in the form of things that will draw us away from God. So this command is on the basis of the whole Jewish religion. Now, the Jewish religion is monotheistic, okay? Meaning that it allows for only the worship of one God. Now, there are other religions and there are other sects of society that have multiple gods. And for a matter of fact, the society that they came out of in Egypt, they had multiple gods. And if you look at the region in which they are in, you can actually find the fact that they actually had gods for each season. They had gods for each event. They had fertility gods. They had war gods. They had harvest gods. They had love gods. They had sun gods. They had weather gods. They had ocean gods. They had mountain gods. And the list goes on and on and on. What? Sun god, yeah, absolutely. Moon god, valley gods, life gods. I mean, there were so many different gods, cow gods. I mean, they worship just about anything and everything. And the idea was the more gods that we could have, the better we are. That was their mindset because they said, okay, we can cover everything. I'm going to have a God for every situation that I find myself in life because it makes it easier because all my bases are covered. I don't have to worry about my health because I've got a health God. I don't have to worry about, whether I'm going to make money because I got a money God. They had money gods. They had every type of a God that was imaginable because they wanted to make sure all of their situations were taken care of. And if one God was too weak and not equipped for the situation, hopefully the other gods would take up the slack. And that's really what their mindset was. So polytheism was rampant. In other words, multiple gods. And the Jewish religion was the first monotheistic religion that was out there. It is the first monotheistic religion. Now, logically speaking, there can be only one God. We understand that, right? God is a supreme being, the highest over all. There can only be one supreme being. You can't have multiple supreme beings. There's only one supreme being, and there can only be one at the top. And he takes care of everything without having all those other gods, right? He's the one who created it all. He's the one who makes the ocean stop. He's the one who makes the rivers flow. He's the one who does all of the things that they're wanting all of these other gods to do. So the first commandment is they shall not have any other gods before me. Okay, the second commandment we come to. Why do you think people made idols in biblical days? So they could see the God. Absolutely. I believe that because they could see it, they could touch it, they could feel it. They could hold it in their hands. This is something that was attainable to them. God the Father, you can't touch him. You can't feel him. You can't see him. You can't, smell him in the room. He's there, but we can't grasp him. Okay? So the second commandment is do not have any idols. And I believe that, once again, it's so that physical touch and the tangible stuff is something that people want. But God says, I want you to understand, I am the God that you're to serve. You're not going to be able to see me. You're not going to be able to touch me. You're not going to be able to understand all of me. But in our own lives, we like to do all of that stuff, right? We want to see it. We want to touch it. We want to feel it. It's easier to believe something that you can see, even if it's just sitting there on the mantle doing nothing, right? So it was also a little God that they could make into their own image. And truth be told, we really, as a society or as a creation, want to have our God be more like us than us like him. That's our human nature. So, is it God that they could do whatever they want? It was a God of their choosing. If they wanted to be a golden God that sat on the mantle and played a harp, that's what you made him into. And then you go around telling everybody, see, my God plays a harp, so everybody has to play a harp, or else they're not worshiping the right God. Because I play a harp, and I want it to be exactly what I want it to be. No other idols either. No idols before me. The third commandment is we must not misuse the Lord's name or take the Lord's name in vain. Okay? Now, many people believe that taking the Lord's name refers to using it as a swear word. Okay, that's not entirely what this is talking about here. Okay, you hear a lot of people who use the Lord's name in vain and use it as a cuss word. That's not necessarily what he's talking about here. I believe it's still bad to do that, but I don't believe that that's necessarily what this is talking about. Now, there's so much more involved with the use of God's name. To understand the severity of taking the Lord's name in vain, we must first see the Lord's name from a perspective as outlined in Scripture. Now, God of Israel was known by many names, right? He was known as Jehovah Rapha, the God that heals. He was known as Jehovah Shammah. He was known as all of these different titles. And as we look at the different titles, this is who God is. Now, the God of Israel had a concept that was personified in his name. In other words, everything that he said about himself was who he is. So, we need to understand that God's nature and abilities and the totality of his being, and especially his glory, are reflected in his name. Everything. I'm actually going to be doing a sermon series in the near future that's going to be talking about different names of God. Okay, and we're going to go through like 7 of the different names of God as we go through this series. But because of the greatness of his name, any use of God's name that brings dishonor to him or a misuse of his character is sin. Well, breaking an oath would be one of the ways, but it's even so much deeper than that. It could be anything. The commandment forbids using the Lord's name in any irrelevant or any irreverent manner. So it can be, I'll go to a show that I watched the other day. I had on the show, the TV, I was watching The Voice. I love music shows, so I was watching The Voice, okay? And Snoop Dogg was on there, and he was doing, I'm going to ask the gangster spirit to lead me into picking who I need to pick. And he did this number, and then he chose who he was wanting to pick. That is irreverence to God. Okay? That's what I'm talking about. Anything that is irreverent towards God, anything, is what God is saying is this sin. It's not just saying his name with a cuss word at the end of it. Absolutely.
Use his name, but just poking fun at just God presence in general.
Absolutely. Anything that is leading towards anything derogatory towards who he is. Okay? So, this commandment forbids taking the use of the Lord's name in vain in any irreverent manner because it would indicate a lack of respect for God himself. A person who misuses God's name, it says, will be punished. You'll be punished. And I believe that there is a larger sense in which people today take the Lord's name in vain. Those who name the name of Christ. How about this? They name the name of Christ. They pray in his name. They take on the name as part of their identity, right? But they deliberately and continually disobey his commandments. that is also taking his name in vain. Because you're saying, I'm a child of God, I've been bought with the blood, but yet I go ahead and I sin the same way I've always sinned. That is taking the Lord's name in vain. That is saying, I claim Christ, but I choose sin. Okay? And that's also that same type of mindset. So, these are all things and ways that we can take the Lord's name in vain. So, that brings me to the fourth commandment, is to observe and keep the Sabbath. So, what is the Sabbath? Seventh day where God rested. Okay. It is an observance or an abstinence from work. It is a way to observe God and abstain from work. Okay, that's what the Sabbath is for. Now, the word Sabbath is related to a Hebrew root word that means cease or stop. And God commands his people to cease from their labor so that they can rest, refresh, and refuel. It's the purpose of it. He had set his people free from slavery in Egypt, and as children of God, they were no longer bound to the work non-stop like slaves. And God gave them the rest as a gift. A day to cease from working, a day to honor him. And the Old Testament Jews followed the pattern of setting apart the seventh day and keeping it holy. They did it. They continue to do it today, okay? In a lot of the more traditional Jewish settings, they will still continue to take the Sabbath off. That's what they continue to do. Now, most biblical scholars agree that God still desires to give his children the same gift of rest, even in the New Testament, even in the New Covenant. And Christians all around the world now observe that first day of the week as the Sabbath. Why do we change it to the first day of the week? Did anybody have any ideas why the early church changed it to the first day of the week? Resurrection, absolutely. And it was also a way to give of God our first fruits. We give him the first day, and then he blesses the rest. So it was just a mindset shift from the old covenant to the new covenant. So most biblical scholars would agree that that is why Sunday is a day of honor for God and the day that we should be finding rest for ourselves. Now, there's no biblical basis for changing it to the seventh day, but scholars cite, once again, that it's the fact that he rose on that day and that is a way to give him our first fruits. So, Mark 2:27 says this, the Sabbath was made to meet the needs of people and not people to meet the requirements of the Sabbath. Okay? So, in other words, the Sabbath was made for people and not people for the Sabbath. It's not so that we can be just obedient to the law. It was actually so that we would find rest, that we would truly be restful. We need rest. Human beings need rest. If you don't get rest, you get sick. If you don't get rest, you have all kinds of problems. If you don't get rest, you get irritable. You get, all of these things. Rest is vitally important to human nature. So these are the first four commandments. All of them tie directly to our relationship with God. And now next, we set directly into looking at those ones who sort of help us with our relationship with our fellow man. And that's through 12 through 17. So let's read those real quick. Honor your father and mother. Then you will live a long, full life in the land of the Lord your God is giving you. You must not murder. You must not commit adultery. You must not steal. You must not testify falsely against your neighbor. You must not covet your neighbor's house. You must not covet your neighbor's wife, male or female servant, or ox or donkey, or anything else that belongs to your neighbor. Okay. So the fifth commandment is simply this. honor your mother and your father. What do you think it means to honor your parents? And is there a difference between honoring and obeying? Okay. Okay, you honor by obeying. And you said yes, there is a difference. Anybody want to go a little bit deeper into that? To honor your parents sort of means to treat them with respect, to show appreciation for their sacrifices, to love them unconditionally. Okay? It goes beyond obedience. Right, and that's the reason honor is so important here. For someone to do what their parents say and then grumble underneath their breath, are they honoring their parents? That's what God is talking about here. Honor your parents. It takes it a step further. I'm not obedient to my parents because they're telling me what to do. I'm obedient to my parents because I'm going to honor them. This does not have a timeline. It does not say honor your parents when you're in the house. Okay, I believe that honoring your parents is something that you must continue to do. That doesn't necessarily mean sitting there and obeying everything that they tell you to do. You know, if they tell you to sell stock, I don't think that you need to sell stock just because they told you to sell stock. But there's a way to honor your parents, and it's how you treat them. I really believe that. I believe it's how you treat them. And God has called us to honor our parents, not just while they're in the same house. Because once again, in this culture, they never moved out. They just added on. They would build another section onto the house. And everybody would do the same thing. The job, if you were a farmer, well, your son's a farmer. And then his son's a farmer. So they had to continually honor their parents. So this concept is rooted in the Ten Commandments understanding. Because what it means is it's expressed in our actions, our speech, and our lifestyle. It's expressed in everything we do. And that's why I believe that it's the beginning of all of these other ones that deal with people. Because we've got to understand, we've got to get that one right before we can really learn how to deal with all of the other people that we have to deal with in life. So the first one. Yeah.
I think you can also, I mean, as you said it, they're not mutually exclusive. I think you can honor them with, and even not obeying them. I know you talked about the soccer example, but I think they're more substantive matters because at some point you may know that they need something that they don't wish to have or they don't understand that they need to have in their later years. And doing things for them, making decisions for them, you're honoring them.
Absolutely.
They may say, I don't want to do this, but you say, well, you need to because, that's the healthy choice or that, that'll keep you safe or this will do that. And so while I think they're very close together with their children, obedience and honoring, but maybe not as much, not saying that you shouldn't obey when you can, but there are times I think that you've got to make the decision that still honors them, even if it's not obeying their every desire.
I would agree with that. Yeah, I would agree with that 100%. I believe that there's a lot of times in our lives when, I'm dealing with that with my mother now. Her mind's not there and she doesn't understand, and we're doing what's best for her, but she doesn't understand that we're really doing what's best for her. So yeah, I can see that as well. Yeah. I believe that you still honor your parents. You still love them. You still honor them. Doesn't mean that you have to be abused. That's not what I'm talking about. It doesn't mean that you need to stay in that situation that you are being abused. I still believe that you need to honor your parents because it's what God has commanded us to do. Not everything that my father did is what I was hoping that I would become as I grew up. Okay, I said that I'll always parent differently. I'll always do this differently. But I still choose to love my father, and I still choose to respect him. And when he calls, and all he wants to do is talk to me about fixing his computer, I fix his computer because that's my way of honoring him. He has asked me to do something for him, and because of my love for my father, I do it. And that's something that I believe that we all need to continue to do. Once again, it's in life, there's going to be situations where we don't have the best relationships. And as we go through all of these commandments at the end, we're going to see that play out because, I mean, in every situation that we find ourselves in, it's always about putting the other person above ourselves. In every one of these. If we think about the other person before we think about ourselves, we won't break these last 6 commandments. We won't. And that's just a reality of it. And it's the first 4. If we love God with all of our heart, our soul, our mind, and our strength, we won't break the first 4. So it all derives from basically those one individual things where we are putting something or someone else above ourselves. And in all situations and in all relationships, that's the way God has called us to live our lives. Someone else above me. And I know that's hard. We live in a culture that it's easy to look at self and say, it's all about me, 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 me. And that's when we get into the situations where we're breaking all of the commandments because it's all about me. And God says, honor your mother and your father. It doesn't mean that they have to be perfect. Doesn't mean that they have to do everything right. And it doesn't mean that you have to even necessarily spend a lot of time with them. But you can still honor them.
What about if they're not getting reconciled?
That's something between you and God that you have to reconcile. And that's through forgiveness. Really, it is. It's through forgiveness. If somebody's wronged you and then you can't go to them and say, hey, we'd like to make this thing right, that's something that you need to just go to God and say, hey, God, I'm having a struggle with this. I want you to clear my heart.
But once you have forgiven them, and even though they don't know it, then I think what I'm saying is, am I okay with God on that part?
Yes, I believe so. If you have truly forgiven and you moved on, I believe it's gone. God does not hold on to the past. God looks at our heart and what he sees in us today. And one of the things that I've struggled with over the years is, I used to not forgive myself. I think I've told some of you that anyway. I was so angry at myself because of my sinfulness, because I grew up in the church. And yet I continued to do what I wanted to do. I just continued to live for self. I continued to do all those other things. And I struggled mightily with forgiving myself. And it wasn't until the pastor came up to me after a church service and he says, God just wanted to let you know, you need to forgive yourself. Before you can ever become what God wants you to become, you need to learn to forgive yourself. Because God's already forgiven you. And that broke me. Because I realized that I don't have to carry it. Christ carried it for me. And that's the wonderful thing about God is when we do fall short, when we do mess up, God is still there with grace. He's still there with his love, and he's still there trying to lead us down the path to where we begin looking at others and God as more important than us. And I know it's hard. That's why it's a journey. It's not a sprint. It's a long race, and God just wants us to be faithful in the race. Any other questions on the fifth commandment? Sixth commandment, pretty self-explanatory. Don't murder, right? Pretty self-explanatory. Don't kill people. And Jesus expounds on this one in Matthew 5:21-22. He says, you have heard that our ancestors were told, you must not murder. If you commit murder, you are subject to judgment. But I say, if you are even angry with someone, you are subject to judgment. If you call someone an idiot, you are in danger of being brought before the court. And if you curse someone, you are in danger of the fires of hell. So he takes it a step further, right? Jesus, in his explanation of the law, he says, okay, you've heard it said, don't murder. But I tell you, how you treat other people can be murder already. Just in the words you say. Just in how you treat other people. Well, in God's eyes, you are basically killing them, period. In God's eyes, it's the same as murder. In God's eyes, blaspheming somebody, cussing them out is the same as murder. In God's eyes, to treat someone with disdain is the same as murder. To have hate in your heart is the same as murder. God doesn't give us reprieve because we don't follow through with the action. But if we have hate in our hearts, we're murderers. Okay? That's what the scripture says. Now, you shall not murder. And you can look at that across the board. That's for anything. We don't take another life. Now, once again, that does not mean, because we're going to get into the law a little bit more, but there's going to be times whenever you look at the law and it says, well, if so-and-so did this, the Bible actually teaches an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, right? That's in the law. And we have to understand that if somebody commits murder, the Bible says that that person is to lose their life. To kill someone is to give up your own life, basically. That's what the law teaches. Now, once again, as we look at grace, and we look at the whole different thing from the Old Testament to the New Testament, there is a transition to where, okay, now there's got to be forgiveness. Now there's got to be grace. And a lot of times what we do is we look at the Old Testament, we want to hold it to certain standards, and then we use the Old Testament whenever we like the Old Testament, but we use the New Testament when we like the New Testament. We got to look at the whole thing in its whole package. And once again, when God says, you must not commit murder, I believe that you should commit murder, period. Any questions on murder? Any statements on murder?
Well, a lot of people justify, when they're talking about abortion, that it's okay if there is incest or rape. And a lot of people here are not going to change their mind on that.
It's not your job to change your mind.
No, it's not. I know that.
That's God's job. And once again, I can sit there and I can tell you that it is God who gives life. And it is not man's job to take it. And that's where I would leave that. God gives life. And it's not my job to say that I have the right to remove that life. That's up to God. Okay? So once again, whether it's abortion, whether it's capital punishment, whatever it is, I believe that God lays out, you shall not murder. Okay? And I believe that we all have to look at that and say, okay, what does that exactly mean? How does that really apply to me? Because once again, I think it's basic. I think it's simple. You shall not murder. You shall not take the life of someone else. That's what murder is, right? I mean, we can talk about the whole war thing and you know, how, you know, you're taking a life of somebody in war and everything else. Well, that's not murder. That's a whole different thing. And we've got to, well, and once again, absolutely, absolutely. Not all killing is murder. And once again, I was in the military. Don was in the military. Jim was in the military. But in the same token, I believe that when God says thou shalt not murder, he means exactly what he means.
So if you're serving on a jury and that presents itself, what do you do then?
The jury for what? For abortion?
No,
For a murder trial?
yeah,
They'll ask you questions ahead of time whether you're opposed to it or not. Virginia, they don't have it anyways.
Yeah.
So you don't have
Yeah, they asked me, because I actually had a murder trial that I was called in to do. And they actually asked me all those questions. And I explained exactly what I felt like the Bible says, and they were fine with it. So both the prosecutor and the defense attorney were fine with it. So I was on the jury. Then it got kicked out because of the judge did something that he wasn't supposed to do. He disclosed something he wasn't supposed to disclose or something, and it was kicked out. So,
Get out because they want to know, if you know anything about this, it's in the newspaper every day.
well, they ask all kinds of questions. They do. So once again, murder is murder, and I'll just leave it at that. I believe that murder is murder. Seventh commandment: you shall not commit adultery. Okay. Now, adultery biblically is defined as the act of engaging in sexual relations with someone who is not your spouse. Okay? Plain and simple. It is also tied to violating the sanctity of marriage. Okay? So, adultery is having sexual relations before you're married or having extra-sexual relationships after you're married. That's adultery. Okay? Now, adultery is considered a grave sin against God and against one's spouse and against the community, and it encompasses sexual intimacy outside of the covenant of marriage. So, when you're committing adultery, you're not only sinning against the person you're committing adultery. If you're married, you're not only committing sin against your wife, you're also committing sin against the woman that you're having relations with, and then you're also committing sin against God. So you're committing all kinds of sin if you're doing an adulterous relationship. That's the way God looks at this. Now, the term also refers to intercourse with mutual consent between a married person and someone other than their spouse. So God regards marriage as sacred. For a matter of fact, God regards marriage so much as a sacred entity that he looks at it in the new covenant as Christ and his church. So it begins in the Garden of Eden, right? With Adam and Eve as a marriage. And then it ends in Revelation when Christ and his church become one. That's why it's so important to him. Because the marriage is the earthly representation of Christ and his bride. So that's why it's so important. So as we're looking at our that adulterous affair or whatever, you're breaking a covenant with God. A marriage is not something that is a contract. Okay? A marriage is a covenant. And we've talked about covenants from Genesis all the way up till now, right? We understand what a covenant is. A covenant is not even a promise necessarily. A covenant is a binding agreement that says, I will not do anything to come against this. And yet, if we have adulterous affairs, we're obviously breaking that. That's why it's so important. God regards marriage as sacred. So adultery in the Bible was taken very seriously, as well as it should be. For a matter of fact, in the law, if you committed adultery, you would be killed. It was that vile of a sin in God's eyes. And there weren't a lot of sins that were that vile that he would say, okay, they need to die. But adultery was one of them. Okay? Any questions on 7? Number 8, you must not steal. Okay, what are some methods of stealing that are common in today's society that you wouldn't even necessarily see as stealing? Taking an ink pen from work, okay. It's stealing, right? When you get too much change back and you keep it, right? Stealing. What other ways? You're on the clock and you're playing around. I see it in places of business. They're at the counter waiting on you, and they have their phone out and they're playing, and you look at it and it's Candy Crush or whatever. It's like, you're getting paid to work, clean the floor, do something.
But I clarified up front that I do church work, so that's gonna be done on the clock.
And as long as your boss is okay with that, it's
As long as you get my work done.
Yep. So once again, but there's so many ways that we do this. We steal. And God says stealing is a sin. Right? It's a sin. So as we're looking at this commandment, the Bible never presents stealing in a positive light. Stealing is always wrong. The Lord does not want us to steal anything from anyone, and throughout the Old Testament and the New Testament, God tells us not to. So stealing is wrong, it's immoral, it's unethical. And in biblical times, if you stole something, they would cut your hand off. You lose your hand. You're caught stealing, you lose your hand. You won't steal again, will you? That's how vile stealing is. It's taking something that is not yours. 9th commandment. You must not testify falsely against your neighbor. Now, some translations say you must not lie. That's not really what the translation is. This commandment has less to do with lying and more to do with speaking lies about someone. You shall not bear false witness. Okay? Now, it emphasizes the importance of honesty and integrity within our relationships with others. To testify falsely means to lie or provide misleading information about someone else, especially in a situation where that information can cause harm. In other words, it would be like me looking at Jim Weiser and saying, I saw him with another woman yesterday. That's what it's talking about. Okay? And that is, once again, it's hurting him. It's defaming him. Okay? And in doing so, God says it's sin. It's going to a courtroom and saying, this is what I saw, Your Honor, and it not being true. But it's doing that in every aspect of life. To talk bad about someone else in an untruthful way is what this commandment is all about. Bearing false witness. This is not merely to maintain a societal standard, but carries ethical weight in how we treat others. Each of us has the duty to uphold truthfulness. Our politicians could take note of this one. Right? Truthfulness is not something that you see. For a matter of fact, I've looked at the different things that have been saying about all of the Virginia people who are running for office, and both sides are lying. Both sides are lying. And you just shake your head and you say, how in the world do people not look up the information and find it out for themselves? Because that's what I do. I look at, okay, well, who's doing this and who's doing that. But they're lying about each other. And we just call it politics. But God calls it sin. Each of us has the duty to uphold truthfulness. That's the cornerstone for healthy relationships, trust, and our community. Okay? So the last commandment is this. You must not covet. Okay? That means you don't go outside and look at your neighbor's car and say, man, I wish I had that. Man, I wish I had their house. Their house is so beautiful. I just wish that I could afford something like that. That's coveting. And God says to have anything or desire anything, to possess anything or desire to possess anything of someone else is covetousness. And at first glance, it may seem simple to refrain from wanting what others have, but this commandment delves deeper into the hearts and minds of us. It's not about actions. It's about our thoughts and feelings. If we see something that someone else has and we have this mindset that I need that, that's covetousness. I like Josh's truck, so I want his truck. That's covetousness.
It's like being jealous of it.
It's being jealous, absolutely, and wanting what the other person has.
It can help if you're happy for them. If they have something.
Well, it's okay if you're sitting there and you're actually honestly thankful that they have something nice, without looking at it and saying, yeah, it's nice that they have that, but man, I'd like to have that too. Because that's covetousness as well. It's okay to like what somebody else likes, and even wish them well with it. But if you're still wanting it, envy, yeah, envy is a good part of it. I believe so. Once again, this commandment delves deeper into our hearts and minds. It is not just about the actions. It is about our thoughts and our feelings. So when we covet, we're not just wishing for something better. We're actually stating that God hasn't provided enough. I don't have that. I want that. So what you're really saying is what God has provided for me isn't enough for me. I'm not satisfied with what God has given me. That's covetousness. Any questions on the last commandment? Or, yeah, go ahead. Oh, absolutely. This is definitely one that you can't see. Yeah, it's in the heart. It's in the thoughts. It's something that you seldom see the fruit of. But it's one of those things that God despises. He doesn't like us to be covetous. Because once again, it speaks to the heart of not only us being unthankful for what we do have, even though we might say, well, I'm grateful that they have it, there's still something inside of us that says, man, but I'd like to have that too. And that's where that sin comes in. Okay? One of these days, I'm going to do a sermon series on this. All of the 10 Commandments. We're going to break them down completely. We're going to go through all of the different things that actually show what these different sins mean in today's day and age, and how we can use them to build our lives today as well. Don't know when that'll be. I haven't written that one yet. We'll get to that one eventually. Exodus 20, 18 through 21. When the people heard the thunder and the loud blast and the ram's horn, and when they saw the flashes of lightning and smoke and billowing from the mountain, they stood at a distance, trembling with fear. And they said to Moses, "You speak with or to us, and we will listen, but don't let God speak directly to us, or we will die." "Don't be afraid," Moses answered them, "for God has come in this way to test you, so that your fear in him will keep you from sinning." As the people stood at a distance, Moses approached the dark cloud where God was. So while God is dictating the law, at least the Ten Commandments, to Moses, the people are perceiving the thunder, the lightning, the flashes and the sounds of the trumpet and all of that stuff, and it's significant to the fact that they're overwhelmed by it. Remember last week I said I would believe that they would probably just be in awe and shock and wonder about everything that is going on. I believe that that is what is happening here. And they're looking up there and they're saying, okay, I don't want to have anything to do with this. Moses, you speak to us and God can speak to you, but we don't want to hear from God. Okay? Now, Moses urges the people to not be afraid. Yet in the same token, he says, "For God has come in this way to test you, so that your fear of him will keep you from sinning." So Moses tells them not to be afraid. Then he tells them to be afraid. Why?
Well, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom.
Okay, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Now, once again, what was the first thing that they're afraid of? What is it they're afraid of? Dying. Okay, if God talks to them, they're going to die. So as we're looking at this, the first thing Moses says is, don't be afraid of God taking your life. But then in the same token, he goes back to them and he says, but you need to be afraid of your sin. Why? Because that's what separates you from God. Your death does not separate you from God unless your sin separates you from God. Right? Why did Christ die? So that we would not be separated anymore, right? Christ has not come. The only way to the Father is through the Son. Moses is sitting there telling them, you're worried about God killing you. I'm worried about you sinning and being eternally killed. Okay, it's just another foretelling of what the gospel message is. So, rather, the real thing is they should fear their sinning, and this instruction is quite stark. Death should not be something we fear, but falling into sin is something that we should always fear. This is because sin brings a greater loss than physical death. Sin is a spiritual death, right? So physical death is not going to be your problem. It's a spiritual death. Let's wrap this up real quick. Verse 22 through 26. And the Lord said to Moses, say this to the people of Israel, you saw for yourselves that I spoke to you from heaven. Remember, you must not make any idols of silver or gold to rival me. Build for me an altar made of wood, of earth, and offer your sacrifices to me, your burnt offerings and peace offerings, your sheep, your goats, your cattle. Build my altar wherever I may cause my name to be remembered, and I will come to you and bless you. If you use stones to build my altar, use only natural, uncut stones. Do not shape the stones with a tool, for that would make the altar unfit for holy use. And do not approach my altar by going up steps. If you do, someone might look up under your clothing and see your nakedness. So, the Lord commands his people against any form of idolatry. And you saw for yourself that I spoke directly to you from heaven. not through some inanimate object or idol, and the Lord did not want to be identified with any created object. He is the creator, not the creation. And this repeats the second commandment, which indicates how pivotal it was to impress it upon their minds: do not make anything that is an idol before me. The commandments avoid idols was repeated, and he is in heaven reigning over nature and not simply a force of nature. Representing him as an idol lowers him to the level of his creation. God must be honored as the creator. And he closes the chapter with the way they were worshiping him. It involved making an altar of earth for me. The idea here is the altar was not to be ornate as the pagan altars were. It was to be just made of earth and not feature human craftsmanship. No cutting of stones, no making it fancy. And God emphasized the personal interaction of a true and living God with his people. Whether an altar was made of earth or stone, its purpose was to worship the Lord. And the altar was not about the altar itself or the efforts of the altar makers. It was and still is about the maker that we worship. Verse 26 contains the last stipulation. And the Lord warned that the people should not go up the steps to my altar so they wouldn't be exposed to their nakedness. This last stipulation concerns the possibility of their minds being on things that are not of God. That's really what that whole purpose is. I want to make sure that when you come to me, you have no other thoughts except focused on your worship to me. I believe that's the way it should be every time we enter into his presence. No distractions. Nothing to make us look here or look there. It should be just us and God. Just worshiping the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords because he's God. That's what he's trying to teach the Israelites, and that's what God is always trying to teach us. Next week, once again, we will get into the law of slavery and sort of how that breaks down, and then we will go into the beginning of where Moses is up there getting the commandments, and he comes down in a huff because they're building the very thing that he told them not to do in Exodus 20. I know, a golden calf. So, everyone ready for prayer? What? 21 next week, 21 and 24. Beginning of 24. Yep.